Alright, so you're watching Poor Africa, and this I think is part 8. This is a very, very important part. This is crucial because Africa was developing right after independence. About 50, 60 years ago for West Africa, Ghana got independence first, 1953, thereabout, 1957, then Nigeria, 1960, thereabout. But West Africa basically got independence, so-called independence, about 50, 60 years ago. Basically, right after independence, that's in the 60s, Africa was developing at a very rapid rate. Now, this cartoon is this piece of art was in Next newspaper, and it's by the photo was taken by Antoine Bird. It's a beautiful piece of work that's trying to describe. It's showing people like the average people, Africans, to the rest of the world, or people in countries in Africa to their presidents. So this is the idea of the people, the common man, and then the world powers. And the world powers are pulling this sheep, this ram around, pulling. It's called a ram's ordeal. Commentary on the sacrifice of human lives by world powers. They pull this guy around. This guy can't stand up. This guy can't pick himself up. You probably would say, no, the African should pick himself up. I mean, come on, you have all the opportunity. You pick yourself up. Now, we're going to demonstrate right here exactly what happened, how Africa was developing after so-called independence, and what happened right then. First off, I call it a so-called independence because it was not actually independence. When you study the Africans the countries that were given independence, the minute they were given independence, if you study the history of Nigeria, I always relate Nigeria because it's the biggest country in Africa and one of the most shameful these days. When you study what happened at independence in Nigeria, you have the British, they came in right after independence, and the first election, they rigged the first election. And that's why the democratic system failed from the scratch. Once you study the history of rigging of Nigerian elections, you'll see a lot of British agents who said they were blackmailed to rig the first election. And there's a prominent African musician, Fela, who sings, if teacher teaches something and a student makes a mistake, the teacher must correct him. From the first election, the British paid to rig the election in Nigeria. It caused chaos. The Biafrans, the Southerners in Nigeria, came up to fight because they couldn't stand the ish. And at that point, the British supported the North, and they basically, from the first independence, corruption and election malpractice was part of the indoctrination that was given. It takes time to wash that off, and it takes time for Africa to develop its own governing system. It might not necessarily need to continue using democracy, which according to Hillary Clinton is a system that actually still fails in America, and she says it's still developing. So no, the other governing systems that Africans need to consider, like the philosopher King's rule, which Plato, the philosopher, said, where you have smart people leading rather than people who are politicians and don't know ish about ish. I mean, I'm a philosopher, I'm a professor, and a physician. And when I think about politicians who don't know anything about anything ruling, and a system where people vote based on media and money and not based on information and intelligence, to me it's retarded. A simple selection of professors from colleges to rule would take any country to the highest levels. I mean, we don't even have to check anything. You don't have to confirm. Professors, physicians, philosophers. But politicians who don't know anything ruling, but that's a whole different story entirely. So right here we are talking about what happened to Africa. Now, at independence, African nations were moving forward rapidly. There was rapid development. And then what happened? There were lots of reserve. African nations had a lot of money. And then, this is a very beautiful article. Once again, I found it on this same website, News Rescue. They have a lot of beautiful articles. And then, the Western world comes and says, hey, you guys, your development is not fast enough. You guys need to get loans to develop faster. The South, when you say the North and South, the South is Africa and the North is Europe. The South had money from its resource that was saved in the World Bank and saved in the West, in the North. Europe now comes and says, you're not developing fast enough, you need to take loans. Europe now gave Africa, now imposed loans on African nations, most African nations, imposed loans on them, IMF loans, to supposedly help them develop faster. Now, these are brand new nations. The African nations were brand new. They are allowed to make mistakes at this stage. It's allowed. These are brand new people given a brand new identity, brand new culture, a brand new financial system, brand new legal and political systems. And the same people who gave you all these brand new systems say, you have $4 billion in the World Bank. To develop faster, you guys need to take a loan of $4 billion, coincidentally, about the same amount of money that African countries had in the World Bank to develop. This is around the 70s. In Nigeria, most Nigerians know what's called Festac 77. Nigeria was so rich, had so much money, they had a festival where they invited African nations to party. It was rich. Nigerian African countries were rich. There was a lot of progress, agriculture development, and everything was going fine. And then these IMF World Bank loans were imposed on African countries. And guess what happened? Shortly after, the interest rates, America hikes up its interest rates. Europe hikes up, interest rates hike up, and they tell Africa to start paying. And the interest rates, Africa is still paying the interest rates on these loans. Africa has paid back 10 times the amount of initial funds they borrowed. Africa still pays back. Basically, this is something you have to read because there's too much to know here. Africa has paid back double what it borrowed. Now, the West now says the West is handing what's called aid to Africa. The aid that the Western world hands over to Africa is much less than Africa pays back interest on the loans that were imposed on it in the 70s. Basically, from the 70s chaos, that's when poverty entered not just the countries in Africa, Haiti, Jamaica, all African regions, the same. It's not coincidental that right in the 70s all these countries started getting conflicts, because the conflicts too started after this loan problem. It's all about money. The conflict started, the poverty started, the oppression started, and guess what? At this same time, what's called SAP, a structural adjustment program, was now imposed. That you African countries, since you cannot finance your loans anymore, we have to punish you for this. We are going to punish you by imposing SAP on you. From now on, you cannot manufacture what you need. You cannot continue the agricultural development because the products you are manufacturing are useless. They can't give you foreign exchange to pay your loans. From now on, Africa, countries in Africa, Haiti, Jamaica, you have to stop your cocoa. You have to stop your rice, the stuff you guys eat. You have to stop your agriculture. You have to only cultivate cash crops that are exportable. This was the destruction of my lovely African nation. From this point on, there was this documentary I watched, it was so beautiful. They showed this lovely guy, I think Haitian African. He went to Ghana and he went up north and he looked at the farm trucks, the agricultural equipment is still there. The farmers are still sitting there the way they've been sitting for the last 30 years. They are still sitting waiting. This is subsidies. America subsidizes its product. Africans are not allowed to subsidize their product. So the whole agricultural setup collapsed all over Africa, Haiti, Jamaica. It collapsed because the subsidies, you are not, according to SAP, you are not allowed to subsidize. You must only produce exportable products. So the whole farming system got destroyed. You cannot subsidize your education anymore. Education cost goes up. Your own farming product goes down. You can only manufacture products that are cash products that are exportable. You have to buy from us. In the process, Africa stopped its own production of crops. African nations their education went down. They are paying back IMF loans higher than they borrowed, with higher interest rates. According to the president of France, which you can see on this website, this is an article, it's a research work on what's it called? It's a research Herbert Launch Labor Resource and Research Institute, the IMF World Bank and Structural Adjustment Program Destruction of Africa. And right here, the president of France confesses that France gets back, the North gets back so much more from the South than the South gets. This is an open fact. So they are robbing Africa, and then they give back a little in aid and they take back tons in trade. And there's unfair trade again. You have the unfair trade where, this whole unfair trade agreement. So in the process, Africa pays the West. Don't ever get it twisted. Africa gives more money to the North than the North gives in trade and so-called assistance. It's so funny. So here you have the African masses. They are hungry and blind. It's our leaders. They think their leaders are so bad. They don't see this monster, this elephant right here, the North and Western nations, World Bank, that are suppressing them, taking the money from them, and then they toss some little rice and say, oh, we're giving you some aid. The other way around. I'll continue with the next one.